concept of witches in A Song of Ice and Fire is a topic where, once you scratch the surface, is a rabbit warren of information and possibilities. For me, what makes George R.R. Martin's version of witches stand out is it tries to blend the classic fantasy trope about witches and magic with our real-world historical counterparts, whom, as we know, were not truly witches, with these women often accused of witchcraft just being wise women or intelligent women with a good understanding of medicine or science. So in the world building of Westeros, George has taken inspiration from both the fiction and the real-world concept of witches to create these characters that are in some cases simple, wise and intelligent women, and in others seemingly have true power. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of these so-called witches, delving into their history, the type of so-called witchcraft they seem to be using, and their impact on the wider lore, and in some cases, even the future of the story. While this video is mostly going to be focusing on Westeros, I will also be delving into some aspects of Essos, given how different the concept of wise women and blood magic are treated across the Narrow Sea. And suddenly, the hag was there, standing in the crowd with her pendulous teats and warty greenish skin leering with the rest, with malice shining from her crusty yellow eyes. Maggy the Frog, in a hallucination of Cersei Lannister, A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 65, Cersei 2. I think in terms of Westeros and the main A Song of Ice and Fire book series and the expanded lore such as Fire and Blood, there are 4 characters that are 100% considered witches by some definition by fans and characters within the story. The most iconic of these is perhaps Maggy the Frog, given how seemingly important she is to Cersei Lannister's character and perhaps the future of the story should we ever see the Winds of Winter. Maggy is a textbook definition of a woods witch. While she's known as Maggy by the wider population, it's very likely this is not her real name, with her true name said to be unintelligible for most common Westerosi. What we do know is that she was brought to Lannisport as a young woman by her husband, who was trading in spices in Essos. Some tales claim she enchanted her husband with spells, while others that she simply seduced him. We are not too sure how she rose to prominence in Lannisport, but soon after her arrival, the population began visiting her for cures to ailments and love potions. Soon, tales began to spread that Maggy could curse a man or make him fall in love. Others that she could summon demons and tell the future using blood magic. There are even some who claim that she lost her beauty due to these spells, but it is more likely it was simply due to old age. We know that Maggy had at least 2 children, one of these a son, who was ennobled by Lord Tytos Lannister, the father of Tywin Lannister, going on to found House Spicer. Though her son was a petty lord, Maggy would become the grandmother of Sir Rolf Spicer and Sybil Spicer, who would marry into House Westerling, with Sybil's own daughter then going on to marry Robb Stark during the War of the Five Kings. In her later years, as her youth had faded, Maggy was described as squat, with watery greenish skin, crusty yellow eyes and a toothless mouth, with large jowls. She spoke in a deep, croaking accented voice. Her breath smelled strange, strong and foul, and her body odour smelled of sickness. It is believed her appearance later in life is where the frog aspect of her name developed, given the similarities between her described appearance and frogs. Maggy the Frog, in her later years, made her home in a tent, with it being as strange and unsettling as the woman herself. Set apart from the bustle of Lannisport, it was a dark tent, with a tall, peaked roof, its fabric heavy and close, muffling the outside world. Within, the air was thick, with the mingling scents of hundreds of spices, along with rarer, nameless fragrance that hinted at origins far beyond Westeros. The only light came from an iron brazier, wrought in the shape of a basilisk's head, its eyes and jaws glowing with a dim green light, with that strange light casting eerie shadows, turning red blood black, and making the very walls of the tent seem sickly and alive. To those who entered, the place felt less like a fortune-teller's tent, and more like the lair of something ancient and unwholesome, an echo of the dread that surrounded Maggy's whispered prophecies. When Cersei Lannister was still a young girl, Her father, Tywin, promised her that she would one day marry Rhaegar Targaryen, the Crown Prince. In 276 AC, during a grand tourney her father had hosted at Lannisport, Cersei became captivated by Rhaegar and grew infatuated with him. Her aunt, Jenna Lannister, told her father intended to announce the betrothal during the tourney's final feast. Overjoyed by that news, Cersei became overconfident, and she resolved to visit the mysterious fortune teller, Maggy the Frog, accompanied by her two friends, Jane Farman and Melara Heatherspoon. In later years, Cersei would recall that she might not have dared to seek out the old woman under ordinary circumstances, but the belief she was destined to become queen emboldened her to prove her fearlessness. That night, the three girls snuck from the tourney grounds to Maggy's tent. Inside, they found her asleep, with Cersei kicking the bed, demanding that Maggy wake up and tell their fortunes. When the old woman opened her yellow eyes, Jane Farman fled in terror. Cersei and Melara, however, remained despite Maggy's repeated warnings to leave. When the witch refused them, Cersei threatened to tell her father and have her whipped for insolence. With visible irritation, Maggy relented, saying she would need to taste the blood. Producing a twisted iron dagger, she instructed them to cut themselves. Cersei pricked her own thumb and Melara's, offering the drops to Maggy. Only then did the witch consent to answer 3 questions. Cersei's first question asked when she would marry Rhaegar. Maggy replied that Cersei would never wed the prince, but rather the king. At the time, Cersei took this to mean she would marry Rhaegar only after King Aerys' death. Her second question was whether she would be queen, to which Maggy answered that she would, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all you hold dear. For her third question, Cersei asked if she and the king would have children. Maggy foretold the king would have 16, and that you shall have 3. She went on to say that Cersei would outlive her children, they would die crowned, and that the Valancourt shall wrap his hands around your pale white throat and choke the life from you. Horrified, Cersei wanted to leave, but Melara demanded her own prophecy. She asked if she would marry Jaime Lannister, Cersei's twin. Maggy told her she would wed no one and die a maiden, her death so near she could smell her breath. Enraged and frightened, Cersei hurled a jar of potions at Maggy, and she and Melara fled the tent as the witch screamed and cursed them in an unknown tongue. Afterwards, the girl laughed off the witch's words as nonsense, but by tourney's end, Cersei learned that King Aerys had refused her father's proposal, and she would not marry Rhaegar. Disturbed, Melara urged they never speak of the prophecy again, believing silence would make it fade. Soon after, she was found drowned in a well. Following Melara's death, Cersei asked her scepter, Saranella, the meaning of the word Valancourt, and learned it was High Valyrian for little brother. Convinced the prophecy referred to her younger brother, Tyrion, Cersei grew to despise and fear him. She never spoke of Maggy the Frog again. In the years that followed, Cersei was often haunted by dreams of Maggy and her dark predictions. Maggy's prophecies would eerily start to become very true. Cersei did marry the king, King Robert. She would only have 3 children, while the king had many. In the aftermath of her son Joffrey's murder and the assassination of her father, Maggy's prophecies weighed heavily on Cersei's mind. She became consumed by the belief that her younger brother Tyrion will soon return to King's Landing to kill her. Her fears and paranoia only deepen as she becomes convinced that Margaery Tyrell, Joffrey's widow and the new bride of her second son, King Tommen, is the younger and more beautiful queen, foretold to cast her down and steal all she holds dear. Determined to prevent this fate, Cersei begins plotting Margaery's downfall. Cersei often would dream of her childhood visit to Maggy's tent, though she sensed that her memories had grown distorted over time. She eventually confides in her advisor, Qyburn, and her new bedmaid, Tiena of Myr, about the witch and her prophecies. Qyburn suggests the name Maggy is derived from the word Magi, meaning wise woman or witch in Essos, and counsels Cersei that even true prophecies can sometimes be delayed or defied. Tiena, seeking to soothe the queen's fears, claims that Maggy's words were nothing more than a spite born of envy of an old crone's attempts to wound a young girl's pride. While Cersei insists that Tyrion murdered Joffrey, Taena comforts her, assuring her that she still had Tommen, and that no harm will ever come to him. Elements of Maggy's prophecy certainly have come true, but like many things in George R.R. Martin's world building, these prophecies are often very misread. A popular fan theory is that Tyrion is in fact not the little brother of whom the prophecy states would kill Cersei, and that Cersei is not considering the fact that Jaime is also her younger brother. And while they are twins, she was born before him. Thus many fans believe Jaime will play a role in Cersei's ultimate downfall. It does seem that Maggy the Frog has some very real power. She's not a simple healer or a wise woman, and does indeed practice and use blood magic. Thus, why she, in my view, is one of the 4 true witches in the story. She has her own way of knowing things, that one. The weirwoods whisper in her ear when she sleeps. Thoros Amir to Arya Stark, regarding the ghost of High Heart. A Storm of Swords chapter 43, Arya 9. The ghost of High Heart also does seem to be a legitimate witch in some form, and some take it further, arguing Jenny of Oldstones, her friend, by connection, was also a witch. We know far less about the ghost of High Heart than we do about Maggy the Frog, but her importance to the story is just as large and looming. In the year 239 AC, the eldest son and heir of King Aegon V, Prince Duncan Targaryen, fell in love with a common-born woman known as Jenny of Oldstones while travelling the Riverlands. Jenny is said to have been a strange and lovely girl who wore flowers in her hair. Local villagers considered the wild Jenny a half-mad peasant, with some calling her a witch. Duncan was already betrothed to the daughter of Lord Lionel Baratheon. Breaking that pact so Duncan could marry a common-born girl was a political nightmare for King Aegon, and gravely insulting to Lord Lionel and his daughter. But King Aegon did relent to his son's wishes, with Duncan abdicating his rights as heir in the process. Jenny would become very popular with the small folk throughout the Seven Kingdoms, and even within the Targaryen court. When Jenny of Oldstones came to court after marrying the prince, she was accompanied by a friend, a dwarf albino woman who was reputed to be a woods witch in the Riverlands. Jenny claimed that she was one of the children of the forest, although this was certainly not true. We cannot be sure if Jenny's claim is in jest or if she truly believed it. But given what little we know of Jenny as a person, her believing the tale would not be a surprise. This figure, who would become known as the Ghost of High Heart, was no more than 3 feet tall. In her later years, she was said to have white hair, so long it almost touched the ground, her flesh very pale, and she had red eyes. She walks with a gnarled black cane. While at court, the Woods Witch produced a prophecy stating that the legendary figure, the prince that was promised, would come from the line of Aerys and Rhaella Targaryen. Their father, Prince Jaehaerys, now heir to the Iron Throne, then insisted that his 2 children marry to ensure the prophecy came true. It's widely known that Aerys and Rhaella never liked each other and were very reluctant to marry. They were generally ill-suited. The sheer impact this marriage would have in terms of the history of House Targaryen and Westeros cannot be understated, given Aerys would become the Mad King, and his son Rhaegar effectively instigated Robert's rebellion and thus the downfall of House Targaryen. We also know the Woods Witch was present at the tragic fire at Harrenhal in 259 AC, where King Aegon V and most of the royal family died in a mysterious accident. She too was believed to have died there. However, she somehow survived and returned to the Riverlands, where she mourns for her friend Jenny, whom is believed to have also died in the fire alongside her husband, Prince Duncan, according to songs about the event. The Ghost of High Heart is still alive during the main books, which brings up a lot of questions about her true age. Given that she was an old woman by 301 AC, implied she must have been a very young woman during her time at the court of King Aegon V, when she made the prophecy about the prince that was promised. Arya Stark and the Brotherhood Without Banners make camp at High Heart, where they seek the counsel of the ghost. They hope she will reveal the whereabouts of Lord Beric Dondarrion and share visions of what is yet to come. During their visit, the ghost speaks of her dreams foretelling the deaths of Renly Baratheon and Balon Greyjoy. Her description of Balon's death suggests that he was slain by a faceless man. She also hints at the death and the strange resurrection of Catelyn Stark after the Red Wedding. When the outlaws later return to High Heart, the ghost tells them of new dreams, She confirms that Balon Greyjoy has indeed perished as she had foretold, and warns that Vargo Hoat waits in Harrenhal, where Sir Gregor Clegane will soon come to deal with him. Her visions turn darker as she speaks of the Red Wedding, King Joffrey's upcoming marriage, and some troubling prophecies concerning Sansa Stark. Upon noticing Arya, she becomes visibly distressed, calling the girl a harbinger of death, and lamenting that she's had her fill of grief since Summerhall. Before the night's end, the old woman requests that Tom of Seven Streams sings Jenny's song as payment for her dreams. As the haunting melody fills the camp, she softly sings along, her voice trembling with sorrow, and she weeps as the music fades into the night. Given how accurate the dreams of the ghost of High Heart seem to be, brings into question just how the prince that was promised prophecy will be fulfilled, and who this prince may be. The most popular theories currently revolve around Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, given both do descend from the line of Aerys and Rhaella. Well, at least Jon does in theory. Was she in truth a witch who lay with demons, bringing forth dead children as payment for the knowledge they gave her? Was she a simple-minded slutton, as Eustace believes, a wanton who used her poisons and potions to bind men to her, body and soul? The writings of Archmaester Galdane on Alys Rivers, Fire and Blood, The Dying of the Dragons, A Son for a Son. Alys Rivers is another well-known character described frequently as a witch. The issue with Alys is due to the nature of Fire and Blood, as we cannot be sure of the true extent of her powers. Namely, she simply could be a skilled healer, or, on the other hand, a sorceress who uses dark magic. We also have no idea exactly how old Alys is. Some speculate she was a younger woman, others that she was in fact much older than she outwardly appeared, and used magic and potions to change her appearance. However, there is some information that points to her being born around 89 AC, making her 40 at the oldest at the start of the Dance of the Dragons. But there is also evidence placing her birth much later, meaning Alys could be as young as her early 30s during the dance. Alys was said to have had long black hair and pale skin. Aemon Targaryen claimed that she could see visions in storm clouds, pools of water and flames. In the world lore we have many other examples of confirmed sorceresses also use flames in this manner, which adds weight to the idea Alys does have true power. However, Septon Eustace, one of the key chroniclers of the Dance of the Dragons, ignored much of this and considers Alys to be a simple wanton woman. According to the accounts of Grand Maester Munkin and Septon Eustace, Alys Rivers was likely a bastard daughter of Lord Lionel Strong, born to an unknown mother in his youth. Munkin describes Alys as a serving wench with a fascination for potions and herbs, while Eustace portrays her as a traditional woods witch. The full mushroom, however, offers far more sensationalized tale, claiming that Alys belonged to an older generation and had once served as a wet nurse not only to Lionel's sons, Harwin and Larys, but possibly to Lionel himself. Mushroom even goes as far as to call her an enchantress who bathed in the blood of maidens to preserve her youth. But we must also remember the source of these claims is Mushroom, whose accuracy can be questionable at times, leaning into the more sensationalized versions of events. Thus, Eustace and Munkin dismiss Mushroom's accounts as fantastical, both noting that Alys appeared remarkably young for her age. While all of Alys's own children were stillborn, she remained at Harrenhal, serving for many years as a wet nurse to the noble children raised there within its blackened halls, and also acting as the castle's healer. Alys Rivers survived the initial assault on Harrenhal by Prince Daemon Targaryen early into the Dance of the Dragons, fighting on behalf of the Blacks and Rhaenyra Targaryen. When the Green forces under the command of Prince Regent Aemond Targaryen and handed the king Sir Criston Cole later recaptured Harrenhal, Prince Aemond Targaryen ordered the deaths of the remaining members of House Strong. Curiously, Alys alone was spared, and Aemond took her for his lover. Following the Green's defeat at the battle by the lakeshore, an enraged Aemond nearly strangled the squire who brought him the ill news. But Alys intervened and calmed him, some say with potions and magic. Septon Eustace disputes Mushroom's lurid claims that Alys in fact used love potions to seduce Aemond. As Criston Cole marched south along the shores of the God's Eye, Aemond and his dragon Vhagar laid waste to the Riverlands. When Lady Sabitha Frey captured the undefended Harrenhal, she she found only Alys there, the woman claiming to now be pregnant with Aemond's child. Aemond soon returned and drove off Sabbatha and fled the castle with Alys at his side. In late 130 AC, Aemond rode back to Harrenhal to face Prince Daemon Targaryen and his dragon Caraxes, with Alys accompanying him. Aemond revealed it was Alys who had foretold the confrontation, having seen it in one of her visions. Before the battle, he kissed her farewell and took to the skies upon Vhagar. From the heights of the Kingspire Tower, the pregnant Alys watched as Vhagar and Caraxes crashed above the waters of the God's Eye, both dragon riders slain during the fight. In 132 AC, after the Dance of the Dragons had ended, during the regency period of King Aegon III, reports reached King's Landing that broken men and outlaws had taken control of Harrenhal, rallying under the rule of a sorceress witch queen. At the command of Sir Tyrion Lannister handed the king, Sir Regis Groves of the Kingsguard and Sir Damon Darry led 100 men, half from King's Landing, half from Darry, to reclaim the cursed castle. The supposed witch queen was soon revealed to be none other than Alys Rivers, who now styled herself the widow of Prince Aemond Targaryen, claiming she and Aemond had married before the battle above the God's Eye. Alys presented a young boy whom she claimed was the trueborn son by Aemond, and therefore the rightful king, not Aegon III. If it were true that Alys and Aemond were married, then theoretically their son would have the best, failing that a very strong claim to the throne, thus making the babe very dangerous to the weak stability forged in the wake of the Civil War. When Sir Regis Groves openly insulted Alys and denounced her claim, he was struck dead on the spot. There's conflicting reports of what actually happened. Some said Alys burst his skull with sorcery, while others believed he'd been felled by a crossbow bolt or stone hurled by one of her followers. Her rabble then stormed out of Harrenhal, slaughtering the loyalist force. Only 32 men survived, led by Sir Damon Darry, escaping back to Castle Darry. The next day, Alys sent one of the captured loyalists back to Darry as her messenger. The shaken man told a dreadful tale of how a dozen captives had been tortured to death, and that Alys had cursed him to die should anyone laugh at his story. He warned that anyone who approached Harrenhal without submitting to this new mistress would meet death, and swore that he had seen a dragon within the castle walls. Though Sir Damon forbade mockery, one onlooker laughed, and the messenger suddenly choked to death on the spot, as if strangled by an invisible hand. Back in King's Landing, the death of Sir Regis deeply troubled Tyrion Lannister, the Hand of the King, yet Lord Unwin Peake, the Lord Regent, dismissed the reports of dragons and sorcery as peasants' superstition, claiming mere outlaws were behind the disturbance. The rest of the regents sided with Unwin, planning to raise a larger host to retake the castle. However, their efforts were cut short by the outbreak of the winter fever in 133 AC, which ravaged the realm and postponed any action against the Witch Queen of Harrenhal. For me, Alys Rivers and her son is one of the largest plot threads left hanging in Fire and Blood Part 1, and is one I hope we get resolved should we ever get a Part 2. It's clear George was going somewhere with her story, but just could not fit it into the first part of Fire and Blood. On balance, I do think it's clear that Alys does have some form of true power. I think she definitely has prophetic visions, and is a very skilled healer, and perhaps does use potions to some degree. I also suspect, personally, she may have other powers, such as the ability to create illusions, hence the so-called dragon that was reported within Harrenhal. But there is still a lot of mystery regarding her true nature. I'm really keen to see where her story goes, given a possible trueborn son of Aemon Targaryen being alive out there with a strong claim to the throne is a huge deal. Even if we do never see Alys again in a Fire and Blood sequel, there is a lot of fan speculation that her son could go on to form his own house or marry into a Riverlands house. The most popular version of this theory, but one that's absolutely wild, is given the Harrenhal connection with Alys Rivers, that House Went is descended from Aemon and Alys's son. Catelyn Stark's mother was a Went, making all of Catelyn's children part Went, thus meaning Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran and Rickon could be descendants from Aemon Targaryen. While I do really enjoy this theory, I think it is still very much a theory in the broadest definition of the word. When the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, Azor Ahai shall be born again amidst smoke and salt, to wake dragons out of stone. Melisandre to Davos Seaworth, A Storm of Swords, Chapter 25, Davos 3. Melisandre is an interesting case of a sorceress or witch, because while many are skeptical of her power at first, we see through her actions in the story that she does have on some level true power and prophetic visions. What we see with her foretellings is, while she does in a roundabout way get things right, she often misinterprets the meanings of these visions, which is something we kinda see her struggle with during her Dance with Dragons chapters, where she wrestles with her visions of Jon Snow and his role in what's to come. Melisandre was born a slave, sold as a child to the Red Temple, where she was raised in the faith of R'hllor, the Lord of Light. From her earliest years, she was trained in the arts of prophecy and fire magic. In time, she mastered several languages, including the Common Tongue, High Valyrian, and the language of Asshai, the distant shadowed city where she honed her craft. Melisandre has lived and practiced her sorcery for years beyond count, her age concealed by the glamour of her arts and an unwavering devotion to R'hllor. Guided by her visions, she becomes convinced the ancient prophecy of Azor Ahai reborn, the hero destined to lead the final battle against the Great Other, was soon to be fulfilled. Her search for the Promised One brought her across the Narrow Sea to Dragonstone, which she believes is to be the prophesied place of smoke and salt, where Azor Ahai would be reborn amidst fire. There she found Stannis Baratheon, the then Lord of Dragonstone, and became persuaded that he was the chosen champion of R'hllor, the reincarnation of Azor Ahai. At Dragonstone, Melisandre rose to prominence as both an advisor and a priestess, gaining the trust of Lady Selyse Florent, Stannis' devout and impressionable wife. From this position of influence, she began to shape Stannis' course and his fate in accordance with the fiery visions she saw in her flames. Melisandre is renowned for her striking, almost otherworldly beauty, a quality that seems both alluring and unsettling to those who behold her. She is tall with a slender, graceful figure, full breasts and a narrow waist that lends her an air of commanding elegance. Her skin is pale and flawless, untouched by age or imperfection, and her hair glows like a deep burnished copper, flowing long and smooth about her shoulders. Most mesmerizing of all are her red eyes, bright and hypnotic, which seem to shimmer with an inner fire. Many find her gaze uncomfortable, as if her eyes look not upon the world, but through it. True to the customs of the Red Priests of R'hllor, Melisandre clothes herself in exclusively shades of crimson and scarlet. She's often seen in flowing robes of bright fire silk, scarlet satin, or blood velvet, sometimes layered with blood-red undergarments beneath. She completes her attire with scarlet cloak that swirls like flame around her as she moves. Most distinctive of all is the tight red gold choker she wears, set with a large ruby that glows with an inner light when she works her magic. The gem is more than ornamental, it pulses with power, and at times has been said to burn against her skin when her spells demand great strength. One of the true examples of her power comes with the death of Renly Baratheon, when Stannis declares himself king, his claims contested by his younger brother Renly, the Lord of Storm's End, who has likewise crowned himself and secured the allegiance of most of the Stormlords and the powerful houses of the Reach. As Stannis sails from Dragonstone to lay siege to Storm's End, Melisandre accompanies him, serving as both advisor and prophet. Her conviction in Stannis' destiny as Azor Ahai reborn is unwavering. Upon arriving before Storm's End, she urges Stannis to offer Renly one final chance to bend the knee, and acknowledge his elder brother as the rightful king. But during this tense parley between the brothers, she acts as Stannis' standard bearer, holding aloft the fiery heart of R'hllor, emblazoned on Stannis' banner. Melisandre, however, has already foreseen Renly's death in her flames. On the eve of the coming battle, she performs a dark and terrible act of sorcery beneath the walls of Storm's End, drawing upon Stannis' life essence and her own shadowbinding powers. She births a shadowy assassin, a creature in the likeness of Stannis himself. That very night, the shadows slip into Renly's pavilion, striking him down as he arms himself for battle, killing him without leaving a mark. Those present, including Catelyn Stark, glimpse the uncanny silhouette of Stannis at the moment of death, and Catelyn leaves convinced that Stannis himself is responsible for his brother's murder, that she cannot comprehend the means it was done. Another good example of Melisandre's true power is her use of king's blood. Ever convinced of the truth of her god R'hllor's prophecies, she tells Stannis Baratheon that there is a great power in king's blood. She believes that the royal blood flowing through Edric's Storm, Robert Baratheon's acknowledged bastard son, can be used in a sacrifice to wake dragons from stone, fulfilling a vital step in the prophecy of Azor Ahai reborn, and arming Stannis with the power to defeat the Great Other, the god of darkness and cold. Both Melisandre and Stannis believe the realm must be united swiftly under one true king to prepare for the coming war against this ancient enemy, visions of which Melisandre claims to have shown Stannis in her sacred flames. Despite her fervent insistence, Stannis hesitates to spill the boy's blood, unwilling to commit such a deed. Instead, at Melisandre's urging, he performs a lesser ritual of blood magic. 3 leeches, each filled with Edric's royal blood, are cast into the flames one by one. As each bursts in the fire, Stannis names aloud 3 false kings who usurp his rightful throne: Balon Greyjoy, Robb Stark, and Joffrey Baratheon. Whether by coincidence or divine intervention, each of these 3 kings soon dies, lending fearsome weight to Melisandre's claim that the Lord of Light hears her servants' prayers. Over the course of A Dance with Dragons, Melisandre has numerous other visions and prophecies while at the Wall, which come to fruition in one form or another, even if the specific details of them are not 100% accurate. Interestingly, I have seen some people argue that Melisandre should not be counted as a witch or a sorceress, given the nature of her powers are seemingly very different from the norm, coming directly from her god. I guess if we talked in Dungeons and Dragons terms, you could argue she's more of a cleric than a witch. But in the context of A Song of Ice and Fire, the witch and sorceress labels also fit her well. There are dozens of other women who historically have been claimed to be witches, and while some were likely so in some degree, given the sources are historical in nature, we can never truly know. Some of these women were very likely witches, while others it seems could have just been propaganda to discredit or taint their reputations. Queen Visenya Targaryen, one of the sisters and wives of Aegon the Conqueror, was a reported sorceress with a keen interest in the dark arts and poisons. Some even say that she may have even played a part in the untimely death of King Aenys to make way for her own son, Maegor. It's hard to know how much of these claims of dark magic and poison are true, as they could very much be retroactively made after her involvement in her son's claiming of the throne, as a way to sully her reputation somewhat by her political rivals. The claims made about Tyanna at the Tower, the 3rd queen of King Maegor the Cruel, bears a remarkable similarity to Visenya, the difference being that Tyanna seemed to be a lot more open publicly about her use of dark magic. Or at least there's a lot more evidence that points towards it. There are claims by multiple sources that she was the person whom saved King Maegor's life after his trial of 7. After all other healing by maesters and scepters failed, it's suggested she used her dark magic to cure the king. But again, what could be seen as magic could have just been Tyanna being a gifted healer, with knowledge the maesters perhaps did not have access to. Again though, Tyanna was very open about her use of the dark arts, which does put more weight in that direction. The perfect example of how being accused of being a witch can be used to discredit and slander somebody is the accusations made to Lara Rogaire during the regency of King Aegon III. Lara was the wife of Prince Viserys Targaryen, later King Viserys II, whom he had married while in captivity in Lys after being captured during the Dance of the Dragons and thought dead by all those in Westeros. After Viserys was returned to Westeros after the war, with him came his wife Lara and her family, the Lyseni banking house Rogaire. The Rogaires grew very powerful political players during what became known as the Lysene Spring, with deep influence over the king and the finances of Westeros. Though the people of King's Landing rejoiced when Prince Viserys announced to the royal court that Lara was pregnant, they soon came to dislike her and mistrust her. Cats were frequently seen coming and going from Lara's chambers, and people began to whisper that they were her spies. Some even claimed that Lara was able to transform herself into a cat, and darker rumours followed soon after. Her worship of the god Yonderos caused men to whisper that Lara would transform herself into a man to visit brothels on the Street of Silk. Also, because of her worship of Sagael, she was blamed every time a child went missing in King's Landing. Lara's brothers were also greatly disliked, as they were proud, grasping and ambitious, and their foreign origin and practices led to suspicion and mistrust. By late 134 AC, some in King's Landing began to fear the Rogaires would soon rule the Seven Kingdoms, with Lara pulling the strings. Another woman of Lycian descent that also has accusations of witchcraft is Serene of Lys, who was the ninth and last mistress of King Aegon IV. Lady Serene was the last daughter of an ancient but impoverished Valyrian noble family from Lys. She was brought to King's Landing by Lord John Hightower, the new hand of the king. Rumours spread that Serene was much older than the king, practicing dark arts to retain her youth and beauty. She died giving birth to the last of the king's bastard children, a girl called Shiera Seastar. There is very little to substantiate the claims that Serene used dark magic. However, given the reputation of her and Aegon's daughter, it does give some credence to the idea. Her daughter Shiera was a renowned beauty and seductress in her own right, with a heart-shaped face and thick curly Targaryen silver gold hair she wore long. Many men admired her. Although she had two mismatched eyes, one dark blue and the other bright green, it was said this was her only defect, and that it actually enhanced her beauty. Shiera was a great reader, even at an early age, spoke multiple languages, and maintained a large, notably arcane library. She was also reputed to share her mother Serene's skills in the dark arts. There were rumours that Shiera used sorcery to aid her lover and half-brother, Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, when he began serving as Hand of the King and Master of Whisperers to King Aerys I Targaryen, and that she bathed in blood to retain her beauty. Speaking of bathing in blood, Danelle Lothston, also known as Mad Danelle, was the Lady of Harrenhal and the head of House Lothston during the reigns of King Aerys I and Maekar I Targaryen, so the same era as Shiera. Danelle had long red hair and wore tight-fitting black armour. Allegedly, she was a dark magic practitioner. After her death, the misbehaving children of the Riverlands were told stories that on a moonless night, giant bats would fly from Harrenhal and take the bad children back to Mad Danelle for her cookpots. Other stories were told about Mad Lady Lothston bathing in blood and presiding over feasts of human flesh. Some argue that Danelle turned to the black arts during the reign of King Maekar, causing her madness and much chaos within Harrenhal, directly leading and causing to the downfall of House Lothston.